Hello again. This is a lecture concerning Chapter 8 in the Levine text, where we go over some of the ideas behind what we call an eclectic approach to practice. One of the things that I've often told my students over the years is that when you go in for a job interview at a facility like a mental health center, for instance, and you're asked about the kind of preferred techniques you use in your work with clients, I've always said avoid the use of the term eclectic, because what that tells a lot of people is that, well, I have a broad range of skills and I use whatever I need to use. If you're being asked specifically what your techniques are, it's probably better to have at least some idea of what you mostly rely upon, whether it would be, cognitive techniques or behavioral techniques or insight oriented work, or whatever, task-centered casework, whatever it might be. And it's good to follow up with a little bit about eclecticism, but we all have to be eclectic in our work. Although we may be specialists and we may focus upon a particular technique or a particular problem in our work, depending upon the kind of setting we have to have a variety of skills in a social work profession, because generally we function more as case managers and generalists. Sometimes we get into jobs where we specialize, for sure, but we still need to have that variety of techniques out there that goes into eclecticism. So, eclectic, what does that mean? In general terms, I think when you talk about have an eclectic approach to practice, you're really talking about being able to draw from a bag of tricks and tricks is the wrong word there, but a bag of skills and knowledge, a fund of skills and knowledge that allow you to provide the kind of intervention that your client needs, dependent upon who the client is, what your practice setting is, and what the client's needs might be. So this is what we're talking about this week. As Levine points out, specialists aren't always available to deal with a variety of problems that clients face. This is particularly true in Alaska, where even if you're practicing in a city setting such as Fairbanks or Anchorage or Juneau, there still may not be specialists in a particular area where you need intervention. For instance, one of the things that I've found over the years is that it's pretty difficult to find someone who is a really good child therapist, who understands children's therapy and has the skills necessary to be able to get in and use whatever techniques need to be used in a variety of ways with children. And so even though we have a relatively well-developed or at least at the time had a relatively well-developed array of specialists in the area, that was something when we were hiring at the mental health center here in Kenai, those skills were few and far between. And so a lot of times then, workers who aren't child therapists may still wind up providing therapy for children and need to have some knowledge as to what they're doing there. And so we use elements of many different theories and techniques in dealing with our human condition. Never do we present ourselves as having a specialty or having skills that we don't have. We should always be honest with our clients about that, but sometimes you may be called upon to provide interventions with specialized populations that you might otherwise refer to somebody who has more specialized skills and knowledge. So we have to decide what approaches produce the results we want, but also make use of approaches that are consistent with our values and our view of human beings, and also consistent with our knowledge and skill level. It is, as this slide points out, and they say a couple of different points during the course of this chapter, there's really a tendency sometimes of those of us in the field, when a new technique comes up, a new focus comes up, to really get involved in that and use this kind of trendy approach, this chic approach. Well, I think I was talking a few weeks back about chic diagnoses in mental health and things like that. I just think sometimes we need to be cautious about those things, not ignore them, but don't necessarily sign on to using new techniques just because they seem to be the latest and greatest things. The skills and techniques that we use should not be based on any misunderstanding about how to use those skills. We should be sure that we understand what those skills are for and what they can be useful for. A worker that has eclectic skills will operate on a basis of a value system that uses all the knowledge, skills, and techniques that he or she has drawn from many different sources during the course of education and training and experience over the years, and we pull all these things together into some sort of coherent whole for us as individuals. Human conditioning being human functioning being as complex as it is, and the needs of our clients being so wide-ranging, it's obvious that there isn't any one practice approach that can be sufficient in anyone's professional skills. And so we need to recognize that there really isn't one way to deal with all the problems of living. That we need to know what new ideas and new approaches are out there. That is, we have to continue our continuing education. We have to be committed to learning. Now, if you're licensed, you have to participate in continuing education and provide documentation of that every couple of years to the state in order to maintain your license. But there are a lot of individuals who practice out there who aren't licensed because they don't want to pay the fee that is involved in licensing. And there's a number of different reasons why I firmly believe we should be licensed in this field. But people make the choice not to do that. And one of the things then that clients need to be careful about is if their practitioner isn't a licensed practitioner, is the practitioner really keeping up with trends and with new knowledge and new skills that are out there, new ways of seeing things? Because if they're not licensed, there's nothing to really hold their feet to the fire to that. Are they working for an agency, for instance, that provides a lot of training and those kinds of things? Maybe something that can fill in some of those gaps. But we need to be committed to ongoing learning, whether we're licensed or not, and to develop the knowledge that we need to be able to evaluate those ideas and those kinds of new techniques and things out there that we have to depend upon. And the book talks about, and I'm not clear on really, to be honest with you, what is significant about this, but Levine keeps talking about needing the difference between the theories that give us the knowledge of how people function, those that give us practical skills for working with people, and those that do both. And it just says we should be able to learn the difference between those theories, and I suppose that's true. Is this something that will give us a skill, or is this something that will give us more knowledge, or both? And finally, we need to maintain this broad base of knowledge and understanding on which to build our practice and make some decision at some point whether we want to practice as a generalist or a specialist. But now, I spend a few slides kind of looking at how technique is developed, and in your book there is a pyramid or a triangle of sorts that kind of shows the base. And so the first thing to do in the development of technique is at the bottom of that pyramid, and then it goes up to finally to having this technique at the tip. This is very theoretical, and I've looked at this, and I would just say to you, if it seems a little complicated, a little abstract, I share that perception, and I've tried to make it at least something useful by drawing out some of the things they say in the book and adding some things that seem to make sense for me with this. But don't worry too much if this seems kind of abstract, because it is. So first, the basis of developing a technique for yourself, for your own approach and your own practice, is to recognize, first of all, what your own philosophy and value system is. Now remember, we have talked many times about the fact that we never want to impose our values upon our clients. That the client's value system may be very different from our own. That doesn't mean that and working with them, it does mean we should never impose our own values when they're different than the client's. But in order to give a good practice and to be able to, be able to function effectively as a professional, we have to know what our values are, and we have to make sure that the things that we're doing don't conflict with our own philosophy and our own value system. And there are some things here that, I think the social work code and any social work author and social work thinker would tell you there are some basic things, and I don't think this list is exhaustive, but here's a few things at least that need to be for sure considered when we're looking at developing a philosophy or value system. And these would be recognition of or rather, a respect for human dignity, including a respect for human dignity in any philosophy and value system, a respect for the right to have a good life, all of us to have a good life, and also determine our own course. That is that self-determination piece that's a part of really one of the core concepts in social work intervention is the right of the client to make his or her own decision about what direction life will take and treatment will take. Our philosophy must maintain a sense of social responsibility that focuses on the welfare of citizens as the primary responsibility of a society. When we, and you find me talking sometimes about political issues in classes, in our lectures and in the class, it really is appealing to this point because so much of the political atmosphere in this nation in the last 20 to 30 years has been really turning society's attention away from the welfare of its citizens. And by that I mean, the government kind of handing off responsibility to charitable organizations and private individuals and asking us as human beings to take care of our fellow man rather than stepping forward, and because the needs are too great for any of us to do that. And so that's at least my take on this particular point, and also that the change and development occur in individuals, in groups, in society, and sometimes our intervention can help that change be healthy and desirable. So having recognized our philosophy and value system that are built on at least these four principles and others, I think, as well, we then find a goal towards which these values would lead us to strive. And what the author says is to try to make this attainable. We all have, it's the old joke about, to facilitate world peace and, those kinds of things. Well, this is a huge kind of goal that really involves many, many smaller parts, and world peace may be attainable, but it is not something that any social worker is going to do in their practice. But so break these things down into attainable or doable size, so that instead of making society more democratic, we're talking about helping families to function better, or improving the schools so that the education of our children or equal opportunity is more available to kids, and those kinds of things. So what is it that your practice, your philosophy, your values really kind of drive you towards? What it is that leads you into this field? What do you want to attain in the bigger picture, let's say? Or how do you want to go about doing that? So you develop a theory of your own of the human condition, why people are the way they are, what do I need to know to be able to help people or community or society grow and change. Then we have to establish a theory regarding how people develop and change. What has to happen in order for that change to occur that I want to participate in? And that involves questions about how people function, what are people made of, how can we intervene to help them change, what are the roots of the problems, what interventions help to resolve those specific problems best. This all has to be based on, as this slide points out, good knowledge, good theoretical knowledge. Next, we then have a theory. We have established a theory basically, or will establish a theory about how change can be facilitated. What techniques and approaches are best to use. Now, some of this, again, depends upon the situation and the nature of the problem. Some of it depends on your practice, your area of practice, what agency you're working for instance, what skills and knowledge you do have, and what you can and cannot do in your work setting. It also has to involve your own skill level and what you can and cannot do. So again, we don't present ourselves as someone who is capable of providing services that we don't have the skills to do. So all of these kinds of things go into this kind of theory about how we can best change or facilitate change, and establish principles on which to operate based on your theories of human behaviors, your own practice theory techniques, your skills, your knowledge, your agency's expectations, and so on. Establish a method of operation that really has got practice principles that reflect your theories and values, how you go about doing this. Private practice, are you working for an agency, those kinds of things. So can you best achieve your goals through direct practice, group work, supervision of people who are doing that work, policy development on a larger scale. All of those kinds of things would be a method of practice or method of operation. And then finally, know the techniques you're going to be using. This is going to involve you staying informed and, again, participating in continuing education all through your career. They have three different eclectic models, let's say. They're not really eclectic models, they're very specific models, but three models that probably most everyone will want to have in their bag of knowledge. And they just kind of break it down a little bit to demonstrate how that pyramid fits into each of these particular modes of intervention. And it really does kind of a nice job, really, of kind of clarifying how, for instance, in crisis theory, each of those 8 or 9 stages in development of eclectic approach, how that fits in there. But just generally, some of the things, and and there's also a good case study for each of the 3 examples, and I'm not going to go into those things. That's for you to read and digest, and I do encourage you strongly to do that. But just some basic ideas from this for crisis theory, for instance. The concept of balance is basic to this theory. We were talking about stasis and homeostasis when we went over systems theory a few lectures back. That's balance. Stasis is balance. And so when we go into a crisis, our life goes out of balance. And as we function on a day-to-day basis, for better or worse, there are good things, there are bad things. There are healthy things around us, there are unhealthy things around us. But for better or worse, there's a balance in our life. And so we're pretty comfortable with that, and life goes on. And then when something happens that upsets that balance in one way or another, a crisis is established. So understanding that really kind of the key element, perhaps the key approach, the key theory you need to have here is that there's an upset to the balance in that person's life that has created this crisis. So out of this crisis theory approach, there are certain practice implications that are very important, and these includes things like being immediately available. If a client is in crisis and you're going to help them in crisis, if this is one of your things in your eclectic practice, then you need to be available to clients when they go into crisis, or at a very minimum have some other resource that you can count upon to be available. But if you're the practitioner, you need to be immediately available to deal with this crisis. Generally, crisis intervention focuses on the immediate problem. We don't spend a lot of time looking about what happened in the past or those kinds of things, but what is the immediate problem? What do we need to do about this now to bring balance back into that client's life? We also focus upon supporting the client's capacity for rational and adaptive changes, or the client's ability to make rational, adaptive choices, I guess is what I'm trying to say here. Good question you can always ask somebody, is, particularly with adults, is can you think of a time when you had a crisis in the past, when something disrupted your life this much in the past? And almost always people will be able to identify those things. And there may be some awfulizing about how this is the worst that's ever happened. Well, then tell me about the next worst thing then. If this is the worst, if there's never been anything like this, what other time have you had some kind of crisis? And how did you recover from that? What did you do that got you through that? And help the client to see that they have strengths that they can employ to deal with this. And so that helps to reduce this sense of crisis really from almost immediately. And then sometimes, depending upon what our particular preferences are in working with clients and other people and what our personalities are like, we may not always be very directive. Most of our education, I think, tells us don't give advice to clients, help clients find the answer within themselves, that kind of approach. And I think that's very valid, very important, let the clients make their own decisions and choices. But in a crisis, particularly because the client's having this sense of disorganization and isn't coming up with solutions for themselves, we need to be maybe much more active and more directive, perhaps in our approach to the problem. Be more direct with things and directive in terms of maybe telling clients sometimes to do certain things rather than encouraging them to make choices. This is a crisis. Crisis theory can be used in working with individuals. It doesn't say as well as individuals, families, groups, and communities as well. So this really entire communities go into crisis at times. So this is just something to keep in mind. Behavior modification is another kind of theory that's very commonly understood and used from time to time in different ways in practice. Although to be a true behaviorist, a lot of times the behaviorists that I know at least really don't. They really are specialists, and they don't really buy into a lot of the other kinds of things that are used. But other theories, let's say, and maybe I'm generalizing there, but that's certainly been my experience in my career. But in behavior modification, this comes from psychological theory that grew out of the work of, Pavlov and his dogs, and the bell and salivation and all that. This is kind of where this comes from, conditioning theory. And then also learning theory has also been established there as well, so that all of this kind of uses some of those kinds of basic kinds of approaches to changing behaviors and rely upon rewards for good behaviors, punishments or withdrawal of rewards for bad behaviors. And punishments is a term that implies like we're spanking them or we're shocking them as might have been done in some experiments, that kind of thing. Punishment doesn't have to be that negative, but it isn't positive. Sometimes just the withdrawal of the positive is a punishment. And so don't think of punishment as being cruel or harsh necessarily. It's just the withdrawal of a positive sanction. And so rewards and punishments are kind of at the basis of this, and they have to be designed to suit the needs of the individual client. Not everybody responds to the same punishments, the same rewards. In fact, what you have to do to really have an effective behavioral intervention is to know the client well enough to know what rewards really make a difference for the client. So giving a 16-year-old boy more time to mow the lawn, for instance, probably wouldn't be much of a reward, but maybe giving him more time on his favorite video game or in front of the computer would be. As just a superficial example of that. Know your clients when you try to design a program like this. The orientation of this is focused on solving a problem. The worker is active in trying to manage the environment mainly, and the administration of rewards and punishments and things like that. And it's very key to understand that you can't just work with the individual, but you have to also work with the environment, because remember that dance we were talking about, the stasis in a system. When one person changes, all other parts of that system are going to have to make changes as well. And so you have to be aware of what's going on in the environment. Years ago, I worked in a behavior modification program in Orlando, and one of the things that we did, in addition to trying to alter the kids' ways of dealing with problem situations, was to bring the parents in and help them kind of keep up with what we were teaching them, and help them to look at their own family situation to see if there's some things that they can do that will help the kid maintain their improvements when they get home. That was the hardest part of the whole intervention. The heading up here that says illustrations of models for eclecticism should be on this slide, isn't. But marketing theory is the third model here. And the interesting thing is, marketing isn't really a therapeutic technique, but it is a skill we have to have in our profession, because in our society, there are places, communities, groups of individuals who aren't reached by services, or who don't know the services are there, or the services that are available are either out of reach or inadequate to suit them. And so, in a sense, we have to know how we go about. Well, we have to look at, say, a community on a larger basis, or a client situation on a larger basis, and make those services available to them. So in doing this, there are 5 or 6 different steps that the text identifies, including assessment of what the needs are, developing a service design, establishing a method of delivering the service, communicating about that service back and forth, not just one way but both ways, and understanding the human cost of the service. human cost of the service. For instance, I think they use this in the text. In fact, that if we educate a community, let's say, or we establish a service that brings to the community's attention the need for reduction in domestic violence, and for the need for women to be able to be more independent and to be able to stand on their own, you may see families breaking up. Women leaving husbands, or husbands battering women because they're afraid they're leaving or whatever. Sometimes there are costs to provision of service that we have to be aware of going into this, and always consider that and include that in your assessment of how you deliver treatment. In marriage therapy, for instance, like this, if you're working with a couple in a marital therapy relationship, and you encourage the passive spouse to speak up and to let the other spouse know what's on, well, let's just say, her mind. Oftentimes this can upset things so much that can set up an abusive situation when they get home again, and the other spouse isn't in a place where they have to perform in front of a therapist. So again, always know your client and know what the costs are of whatever service you're providing, possible costs. Assessment is another important thing, and I think I participated in a prevention activity in a small community on the peninsula, and it was kind of interesting because we were fishing around, casting about for causes to be involved in, and one of the things that we knew we had as a problem was substance abuse by the children, alcohol and drugs as well. And well, one thing that we recognized was that part of the substance abuse was set up by the fact that there was a substance abuse and alcohol problem with the parents as well. Kids were being socialized into these ways of coping with social strains or problems or whatever it might be, looking for recreation by their parents. They grew up watching their parents deal with these things in this way. And so it becomes a much more complex thing when you realize that there are reinforcers in the child's own life and in the kid's own families that have helped to put this in place. Not just the fact that there's a lot of drugs and alcohol available in the community for teenagers. There's issues about supervision of teenagers as well that had to be addressed. But more interesting than all of that was a survey that was done, and the committee surveyed among the professionals in the community, the service providers in the community, to see how aware they were of this problem and whether or not they felt that it needed to be intervened with, and at what level did they think the intervention was necessary. And a separate survey was done of community members, families, parents, individuals maybe at PTA meetings or going into the library or participating in some recreation program. And the interesting thing, and then this was kind of applied to a sort of a model where the community was really ready for the service, was informed about the problem and ready to take action, or was informed but not ready to take action, or was mostly informed but needed to learn more information, really needed more education, didn't want to take action, and was totally uninformed. Let's say, sort of along that level, that kind of breakdown. And taking what we learned from the providers in the community, the professionals that were surveyed, we found them pretty well up there. That most of the providers knew this problem exists and they were ready, well, maybe not quite ready to take action, but they had the information they needed to do that. But when looking at where the community members were, the general community members, the parents and the other individuals in the community, we found by and large a real denial and an absolute lack of understanding that there was even a problem. And so here was a committee of professionals who were about to, and to get other professionals involved in presenting a program to the community when the people that needed to participate in the community had no recognition that there was even a need for them to participate. So how successful do you think that program's going to be? Even though it might be designed really well and we have all sorts of information from outside experts, it's going to be ignored. And so that assessment, that evaluation early on was something that was really critical, I think, and it helped save a lot of time. And it also helped the community to recognize that where the focus needed to be put first was on educating the community about this issue and parents and those kinds of things. And as this slide implies or says, it doesn't imply, is that the change is difficult and painful at times and can be really hard to accept. And so, for instance, as a parent, if you are somebody who has done a lot of socializing with alcohol at parties and things like this, and you have a child with a substance abuse problem now, a teenager with a substance abuse problem, it may be difficult for you to recognize that you may need to change some of your own ways of going about some things in order to encourage the same thing in your youth, the children that you're raising. So even though there'd be a good thing in the end, it can be pretty hard to get there. So then on to the question of whether we specialized or be a generalist. Because of the number of human problems and how complex they are, specialists really are needed in many respects, because we need to have people who have focused really deeply on particular areas of expertise that the rest of us don't always have the capacity to spend time focusing upon. And so this really makes for a real diversity among professionals in the community. And depending upon the community you're in, even a small community might have a wide variety of specialists. Sometimes large cities won't have much of a variety at all. But that's one of the things that is probably important for you to know, is to get to know, well, it's not probably, it is important for you to get to know who the people are in the community, what their skills are, what their skill levels are, and those kinds of things, because you may rely upon the services of those individuals to help your clients from time to time. Social workers not always case managers, but oftentimes they are. And the difference between, say, a service provider, a direct service provider versus a case manager, is that instead of providing therapy, you refer to a therapist or that kind of thing. Instead of participating in behavior modification programs, you refer the child to a program that can help the parent and child, modify behaviors and things like that. And the case manager is an important key role for for so many multi-problem families that we have. We'll deal with that more later on in the course, but in any event, specialists are really pretty important, and specialization really depends upon that. First of all, the general knowledge of how this problem fits where it comes from and how it fits into the human condition. But then that specialized knowledge needs to be placed upon or over top of, let's say, that generalized knowledge. So while practice is specific for a specialist, it rests on more generalized knowledge, but also it has to rest on very specific skills and knowledge to be effective. Now, sometimes when you need a specialist, because you don't have the specific skills or knowledge for a particular problem, say for instance a sex offender treatment program, you refer to another individual who has those skills. And again, depending upon your community and your agency, you may refer out for the direct service provision of that specialized skill by another person. Or you may consult with another individual in order to get information you need to help your client move along. Not necessarily, again, saying that you're providing the therapy, but at least to help your client in other areas to deal with this particular problem. So what you find a lot of times is that you will be participating in what are called multidisciplinary committees. A good example of that has developed around Alaska in the last 10 or 15 years are the multidisciplinary teams in child protection, or in some communities there's different names for them, but child advocacy centers, those kinds of facilities where you'll have somebody from, for instance, the Child Protection Agency, OCS, and representatives of law enforcement agencies, representatives from the Attorney General's office, and from the public defender, perhaps, and from the prosecutor's office, from youth corrections, from the hospital, from forensic nursing staff, that perhaps tribal workers if there's an active tribe in the area. And all of these individuals meet on a regular basis and talk about the cases that they've had in common. Child advocacy centers generally involve cases of child sexual abuse, sometimes other kinds of abuse as well, but in child sexual abuse cases, actually Alaska law mandates that when possible they be taken to multidisciplinary teams such as this. And so everybody from the varying area specialty can provide their input, and a decision to be made as a group as to what's the best approach for a particular client. And that's just one example of that. There are many, many opportunities to participate in multidisciplinary staffing. So you'll see that as something common. But again, when it comes time for consultation, you have to determine what knowledge is needed and identify the best resource for that, and then either encourage the client to use the service. It might be giving the client information about who that person is and helping them make their first contact, arranging for transportation to that specialist. It could be even walking them to the specialist if they have particular fears about identifying the person, or it might be just a matter of calling up an individual with expertise and getting some tips and advice from them. Again, though, never stepping beyond the range of our own training and education in doing so. Now, when we talk about referrals, this seems like sort of a mundane practice of picking up the phone and calling somebody and telling the client, you can access this service by going here, and he or she can be of help to you. But the fact is that there's lots of feelings that can come up with referrals. Clients oftentimes do grow attached to you. They don't always show you this, but you're familiar to them, and so even if they're struggling with you, what they say about the devil known to you is better than the one you don't know, and that could also be their thoughts about going to another provider if this is an involuntary client. But referrals to other people can dig up all sorts of feelings and can feelings of rejection, even anger, and also the opposite end, which is some hope for change and expectation that things will be better. And so one of the things you need to be able to do is to be sensitive to what's going on with your client as you make that referral and deal with whatever feelings seem to be evident. Don't promise your client that things are going to get better when you don't really know it. Just tell them that this is an individual that has the expertise that you believe that the client needs, and you're hopeful that the client will be able to receive assistance and help in that specific area with that person. When referrals fail, it's, as it says here, sometimes just because we're not really sensitive to first of all, to their feelings, if they have, feelings of rejection, for instance, but also because we don't really know sometimes what their needs really are. We may be sending them to the wrong person, or we may think that they are capable of making some changes in areas that they're really not ready to do. So, and the other thing is, of course, knowing what resources are out there and making smart referrals, not willy-nilly referrals. So, okay, enough about that. And so, really here in closing, just a few comments that we need to be able to use a wide repertoire of our methods that we have learned over the years through our education and experience and our trainings to work effectively with the broad array of problems that our clients will bring to us. And there is a whole host of problems. Clients won't bring you one problem without you finding other problems that client deals with as well. In so many ways, our caseloads are becoming increasingly complex and what we call multi-problem families and multi-problem clients. And so we need to really be aware of a number of different intervention techniques, as well as the service community out there that's available to help us with our client. You might, your education, mostly in the bachelor's level in particular, will be probably generalist in nature, but you may decide you want to specialize in a particular area eventually, and so you will work to develop those skills and knowledge, perhaps in your master's training, select specific specializations and pursue training and education in that way. But the more specialized you become, the more you'll need to be able to collaborate with other people also, and again in those multidisciplinary teams sometimes. But the more specialized your focus, the less you're going to be able to deal with a broad array of problems with clients, but may become more of the sort of the niche kind of provider for a client. We always want to make sure that our clients' needs, that total need package I think is referred to somewhere, is addressed as completely as possible. So that's it for eclectic practice. I hope that this lecture kind of made this a little more useful, a little more concrete for you. I think the chapter is pretty abstract in its thinking, but still there's some important points in there to consider. So thanks for listening, and I will talk with you again later.